I've always loved solo hiking. It's something I started doing in my 20s, mostly on weekends, whenever I felt overwhelmed with work or life in general. Something about the silence of nature, the simplicity of walking, the feel of real dirt under your feet. It clears the head. Over the years, I've done everything from short state park loops to multi-day backpacking trips in the Sierra Nevada. But this hike I took in the San Gabriel Mountains back in 2017 still stands out in my memory for one very strange reason. It was late October. The weather was perfect. Cool in the mornings, warm in the afternoons. I had a few days off and no real plans, so I packed up a small day pack, loaded the car, and drove out to a trail I'd been meaning to do for a while. A loop in the San Gabriels that cut through a mix of canyon, pine forest, and ridgeline. About 10 miles all the way around. It wasn't a difficult trail, but it was long enough that I'd get some real solitude out of it. I left the city around 8 in the morning, got to the trailhead a little before 10, parked, and headed out. The first few miles were uneventful. A few other hikers were out that morning. A couple groups of 2 or 3 people, nothing loud or obnoxious. We'd exchange nods or a small wave in passing. The trail dipped in and out of shaded patches. Pines above, loose gravel underfoot. The air smelled like dust and tree bark. By mile 5, I was alone. No one in front of me, no one behind me. The trail narrowed as it hugged a hillside and eventually curved downward into a dry riverbed that cut through a wide canyon. I stopped here to drink some water and eat a granola bar. The sun was higher now, and I could feel it on my neck. I adjusted my cap, stretched my legs, and started walking again. That's when I saw him. He came around a bend in the trail maybe 50 yards ahead. A tall man walking alone, hands in his pockets, head slightly down like he was watching his steps. Something about him looked familiar immediately, though I couldn't say why at first. As we got closer, the familiarity clicked. It was his face, his jawline, his eyes, his expression. Ted Levine, the actor who played Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. I was sure of it. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was him. I'd watched that movie a dozen times. I knew that face, the low, gravelly voice, the way he carried himself, the hollow cheeks and heavy brow. I wasn't someone who got starstruck, but seeing someone I'd only ever associated with such a twisted role, especially in this setting, caught me off guard. We got closer, maybe within 10 feet, and I could see it happen. The exact moment he saw that I recognized him. His face didn't change much, but something behind his eyes shifted, like he was used to this reaction. There was something tired in his expression, resigned, like he knew the reputation that came with being known for such a dark, unforgettable character. We passed each other without a word. No nod, no wave. Just the quiet rustle of clothes and footsteps on dirt. I walked on, but something stayed with me. For the next half mile or so, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What were the odds? Seeing Ted Levine out there, alone on this middle-of-nowhere trail. He seemed relaxed, almost lost in thought, but also slightly withdrawn. Like he was deep in something he didn't want to talk about. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he hiked often. Maybe it was just coincidence. Still, it shook me. I tried to refocus, watch my steps, take in the trail. I was in a dense patch of forest now. Tall trees, filtered light, quiet except for the wind. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. My footsteps, my breath, the way leaves moved when lizards skittered under them. I started noticing other things, too. A trail offshoot, faint, not marked, curved sharply up a hill to my right and disappeared behind thick brush. It looked freshly walked, like someone had recently gone that way, even though it wasn't on any map I knew of. I slowed down, considered it, but kept moving. The official loop was still clearly marked. Then I noticed something else. A second water bottle, same brand as mine, lying off the edge of the trail about 20 feet into the brush. It was upright, full, cap still on, no dirt on it, like it had just been set down and forgotten. I hesitated, looked around. No one. I told myself hikers drop things all the time, but the forest felt heavier. At mile 7, I realized I hadn't seen another person since Levine. That in itself wasn't weird, but paired with the strange quiet, the kind that presses on your chest, it made me feel like I wasn't as alone as I thought. Then came the rustling. It started small, dry leaves shifting, branches brushing. I stopped walking, held my breath, listened. It wasn't wind. It was something moving, something deliberate, off the trail but close, maybe 20 feet into the brush to my left. I stood perfectly still. It stopped when I stopped. I waited. Nothing. Then, just when I started walking again, it picked up too, like it was pacing me. Not fast, not loud, just consistent. Dry branches cracking under weight, like a large animal or a person. My heart rate jumped. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a coyote, something wild but harmless. I kept walking, picking up my pace, listening as the sound followed for another minute. Always just behind the trees, out of sight. Then suddenly silence. It didn't trail off. It just stopped. I turned around, looked through the trees, saw nothing. I walked faster now. At mile 8, I hit a clearing where the trees opened up and the sun cut through again. I slowed down, took a few deep breaths, tried to calm down. Whatever had been following me was gone. The sound hadn't returned. I told myself I was just spooked. The actor, the bottle, the brush trail, the following sound. It was all stacking up in my head. I kept walking, almost done. Then I saw something that stopped me cold. A campfire ring, fresh, stones still warm, a small charred log. Noas. Just smoke, right off the trail, tucked behind a tree. Someone had been here very recently. No tent, no gear. Just the fire ring. I walked past it, didn't stop. My hand was back on my belt, touching the knife. Every sound felt louder now. The birds, the crunch of gravel, the creak of trees. I was high up, and I could see the parking lot again. A small patch of flat dirt with cars spaced out wide. My car was still there, but then I saw something else. Another man on the trail below me, too far to make out clearly, standing still, just watching. He wasn't moving, just staring up the trail in my direction. I kept walking, eyes on him. As I got closer, he turned and stepped behind a tree, disappeared from view. When I got to that part of the trail, he was gone. No footprints, no sign of where he went. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sun was low. I walked straight to my car, unlocked it fast, and got in. I sat behind the wheel and looked around. No other hikers nearby, just the wind moving through the lot. I drove back down the mountain in silence. That night, I looked up Ted Levine again. I wanted to be sure. His face, his age, everything matched. I found an interview from a year or two earlier. He seemed quiet, smart, thoughtful, not at all like the characters he played. I read through a few more articles. He lived in Los Angeles. He liked to keep to himself. I found nothing unusual, nothing to suggest there was anything strange about him. But I couldn't stop thinking about that look, the one he gave me when I recognized him, the tired, knowing look of someone who's used to being feared for something he only pretended to be. And I thought about everything that followed. The noise in the woods, the water bottle, the fire ring, the man watching me. And it occurred to me it didn't have to be Ted Levine. Someone else could have followed me. Maybe the guy I passed wasn't him at all. Maybe I just thought it was. And it was someone else entirely. Someone who noticed I was alone. Or maybe it was him. Maybe it was just a strange, random day that left too many loose threads. But whatever the truth is, I haven't hiked alone since. And I don't think I ever will again. It was early spring in 2015 when I decided to take a late afternoon hike alone in the Santa Monica Mountains. It was one of those warm days where the light hangs around for a while, just long enough to make you forget how quickly dusk can turn into dark once you're on the trail. I'd done the same 5-mile loop dozens of times before. It was familiar, well-marked, close enough to the city that you never felt truly off the grid, but far enough away that if you went midweek, you could walk for an hour without seeing anyone. That day, I got to the trailhead later than I meant to. Work had run long, traffic had been heavier than expected, and by the time I parked and started walking, it was already past 5:30. I figured I could move fast and finish before full dark. I had my headlamp in my pack just in case, a few snacks, water, and a small knife I kept clipped to my belt loop more out of habit than necessity. The first part of the trail winds up gently through a wide dirt path surrounded by dry brush and low chaparral. You get some great views of the canyon to the right, and on clear days you can even see the ocean off in the distance. That evening, the haze was low, and the sky was streaked with soft orange and gold. There was a breeze that kicked up little swirls of dust every few steps. Felt calm, still, the kind of stillness that seems peaceful until you realize how alone you actually are. I wasn't worried though. The loop's a basic one: climb, plateau, descend, and I knew the landmarks by heart. I set a decent pace, focused more on my footing and the rhythm of my steps than anything else. My mind was mostly blank in that way it sometimes gets when you're walking with no real noise around you. The hum of the city was gone. No traffic, no voices, not even birds really. Just the crunch of my trail shoes on the dirt and the wind pushing through the dry stalks. I'd been moving for about 25 minutes when I saw someone coming from the opposite direction. Caught me off guard. Not because it's unusual to see other hikers, but because of how sudden it was. The trail had curved slightly, and when I rounded the bend, there he was. A lone man walking toward me. We were maybe 40 yards apart when I first saw him. He was walking slowly, hands at his sides, head angled down slightly like he was deep in thought. I couldn't make out his face clearly at first, but something about the way he moved seemed familiar. As we got closer, that vague sense of recognition sharpened into something more specific. I slowed my pace a bit. He looked up, made eye contact, and that's when it hit me, hard. It was him, the guy who played James Gum, Buffalo Bill, the serial killer from The Silence of the Lambs. At first, I thought I had to be wrong. I mean, what are the odds? But I wasn't. I was sure. I'd seen that movie more times than I care to admit. His face was burned into my memory. That blank-eyed stare, the deep lines in his face, the way his jaw seemed just a bit too long. It wasn't just a passing resemblance. It was him. I was positive. I was maybe 3 feet away when we crossed paths. He looked right at me, saw the moment I recognized him, and there was something in his face that I've never forgotten. Something tired, something almost apologetic. His eyes dropped just a little. His mouth didn't smile but seemed to soften like he was used to this kind of reaction. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. I walked right past him without a word. Didn't even nod. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me, like they were just carrying me forward because stopping wasn't an option. I didn't look back. Not at first. But after maybe 100 yards, I couldn't help it. I turned around. He was still walking, back turned now, just slowly moving down the trail the way he came. Nothing strange, nothing overtly threatening, just a man alone on a trail at dusk. But something in me was rattled, deep. The next 15 minutes were some of the strangest of my life. I kept walking, faster now, eyes flicking over my shoulder more than I'd like to admit. It wasn't that I thought he was going to follow me. There was no reason to think that. But it was that feeling, the sudden closeness of something deeply familiar and deeply wrong. That creeping sense of unease when your brain insists something isn't safe even if nothing around you has changed. I knew that he wasn't really a serial killer. He was an actor, just a guy. But it didn't matter. My body didn't care about logic. My nerves were shot. The setting didn't help. Shadows growing longer, light draining out of the sky, that golden haze turning muddy gray. It was just past the halfway point when I noticed something strange. There was a break in the brush off the trail. Not huge, but big enough that it caught my eye. Looked like something had pushed through it recently. The grass was bent low and wide, not the usual crisscross from small animals. This looked like a person had stepped off the trail and headed into the hills. I slowed down, looked closer. There was a footprint in the dirt, not clear but definite. Deep heel, wide sole. Hiking boot. Maybe a man's. I stood there for a second, not moving, listening. The wind had stopped. The whole world felt like it had gone still. Then, from further up the trail, maybe 50 yards ahead, I heard something. It sounded like a cough. Low, dry, like someone trying to clear their throat quietly. I froze, waited. Nothing followed. I kept walking, slower now, every nerve alert. That earlier fear came back in full force. Not because of who I'd seen, but because now there were signs that someone had left the trail, and someone was up ahead, hidden, making noise. Maybe it was just another hiker. Maybe it was nothing. But I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't lining up. I started to feel exposed, like I was being watched. The last mile of the loop drops back down toward the parking area through a series of tight switchbacks. Thick brush on both sides, limited sight lines. If someone wanted to hide, it would be easy. Too easy. I kept one hand on my belt, fingers brushing the handle of my knife, more for comfort than anything else. I knew that if someone really wanted to jump me, a little pocket knife wouldn't do much. But it made me feel like I had some control. Every bend in the trail felt like it was hiding something. I kept moving, breathing hard, trying to stay calm. I listened for footsteps behind me. None. But I never really relaxed. When I saw the lot again, it felt like breaking the surface of water after holding your breath too long. I nearly jogged the last stretch, heart hammering. My car was still there, alone, untouched. I unlocked it fast, threw my pack in the back, and sat behind the wheel for a while before I started the engine. I looked down the trail one more time. No one came out. I drove away with every window rolled up, music off, just listening to my own thoughts rattling around inside my skull. That night, I looked up the actor, Ted Levine. That was his name. I knew it, but I double-checked anyway. He lives in LA, still works occasionally, keeps a low profile. I have no idea if it was actually him on that trail. Could have been, maybe not. But that look, the resigned one he gave me when our eyes met, told me it probably was. It's funny, the guy didn't do anything wrong, just walking a trail like me. But sometimes your brain grabs onto a shape, a face, a memory, and it won't let it go. It sees danger where there isn't any. Or maybe, sometimes, it picks up on something real, something subtle, something you can't explain but feel in your gut. I never saw him again. I kept hiking after that, but I don't do solo hikes at dusk anymore. That was the last time. I've done a lot of hiking over the years, but there's one trip that stuck with me more than any other. It happened almost 10 years ago now, during a winter hike in the backcountry of Montana. We were deep in it, no signs of civilization, no phone service, no easy way out. It was the kind of trip you only take if you know what you're doing and have a serious respect for the wilderness. It wasn't my first winter hike, but it ended up being the last time I let my guard down out there. I was 29 at the time, working freelance. That winter, I'd been burning out hard. Long hours, back-to-back projects, the kind of stress that messes with your sleep. When a friend of mine, Alex, mentioned he was planning a 6-day winter trek through a remote stretch of the Beartooth Mountains, I said yes without thinking twice. I needed the break. I needed to be somewhere quiet, cold, and real. There were 4 of us. Me, Alex, his brother Josh, and a guy named Eric, who we'd met through a mountaineering group the year before. We weren't professionals, but we were experienced. We'd all hiked in snow before. We knew how to use snowshoes and avalanche beacons, how to pitch a tent in high wind, how to keep gear dry in freezing temps. We were prepared, or at least we thought we were. The first 2 days went by pretty smooth. Temperatures were in the low teens during the day and dropped to below 0 at night. We had good gear, tents held. Food was warm enough to feel like a reward. Every morning, we broke camp, packed down the snow, and moved deeper into the wilderness. We weren't following any major trail, just topo maps, compass readings, and GPS when it worked. The terrain was a mix of open meadows, pine forest, and the occasional ridge that forced us to zigzag up on all fours. On the 3rd day, we crossed into a long, flat basin surrounded by dense trees, the kind of area where the silence is so complete it almost has weight. We hadn't seen any animal tracks since early morning. No other people, of course. No one else was crazy enough to be out this far in January. We set up camp near a cluster of tall pines and boiled water to cook dinner. That night, the wind picked up hard. Snow started to fall just after sunset, thick flakes that built up fast. We stayed in our tents and rode it out. I remember falling asleep to the sound of gusts, hitting the nylon and thinking how far away the world felt. It was just us and the snow and the wind and the dark. The next morning, everything was quiet again. Snow had piled up maybe 6 inches overnight. Visibility was low, foggy, with the kind of diffused light that made it hard to tell direction without your compass. We packed slowly. Everyone was a little stiff, a little quiet. We were starting to feel the cold in our bones. Around midday, we started seeing strange formations in the snow. Little holes, like something poked down through the crust. At first, we thought they were animal tracks, but they were perfectly round, spaced too evenly. We joked about it. Probably ice melting and refreezing in weird shapes. Nothing to worry about. But then we found the words. We just crossed a small ridge and were moving through a clearing maybe 200 feet wide. No trees, no rocks, just open snow. Alex was ahead, maybe 10 steps, when he stopped dead in his tracks. I caught up and looked where he was pointing. There, drawn in the snow in long, deliberate lines, were the words, "Per audacia ad ignotum." The letters were big, probably 3 feet long each, scratched into the snow like someone had used a stick or maybe a trekking pole. The lines were clean, no hesitation. Whoever made them had taken their time. We all stared at it. The snow around it was untouched. No footprints.
No drag marks.
Nothing. Just flat, unbroken snow in every direction. I remember just standing there, breathing into my balaclava, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Per audacia ad ignotum. I recognized the words as Latin, but I didn't know what they meant. None of us did. We took photos with a camera. This was before smartphones were good for anything in the cold, and kept moving. I think we all felt the same thing in that moment. Unsettled. It wasn't just that someone had been there. It was that the snow around the words didn't make sense. How could someone write something like that without leaving any other trace? We didn't talk much after that. That night, we camped in a dense patch of forest a few miles past the clearing. Everyone was quiet. Even the wind seemed to die down early. I remember waking up at some point in the night to total silence. No wind, no creaking branches, just stillness. I lay there in my bag, staring up at the tent wall, and I felt, I don't know, watched maybe, like something out there knew we'd seen the message. By morning, the sky was clear again. The temperature had dropped hard overnight, probably into the negative teens. The kind of cold that makes zippers stick and water bottles freeze solid. We moved slow that day. Nobody brought up the message. We just hiked, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that evening, after we set up camp again, Josh dug out a small paper dictionary he'd brought, the kind with foreign phrases in the back, and tried to piece together the Latin. His best guess was, through audacity towards the unknown. That didn't help much. We still didn't know who had written it, or why, or how. There was no trail near where we found it.
No campsites.
Nothing on the map. And even if someone had passed through and left it as some kind of weird joke or statement, how did they do it without leaving a single mark around it? By day 5, we were all tired. We'd been cold for days. Our bodies ached. One of Eric's boots was starting to split at the toe. We were making our way back in a slow arc toward the trailhead, and the terrain was getting harder. More steep climbs, deep snow drifts, wind that didn't stop. It was during one of those climbs, near the edge of a ridgeline, that I looked back and saw the figure. Far behind us, maybe 200 yards, standing just at the edge of the tree line. I stopped walking, squinted. It wasn't one of us. We were all together. The shape was upright, human, motionless. I blinked, looked again, gone. I didn't say anything. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe it was a dead tree that looked human for a second. But it stayed with me, that feeling, that presence. On our last night out, we camped near a frozen creek. We'd made good time that day, and spirits were up a little. We laughed more, talked about hot showers and real food, but something still felt off. As I zipped up my tent that night, I looked out over the snow one last time, and there they were again, the words, "Per audacia ad ignotum." Drawn again, this time just 30 feet from our tents. Same size, same shape.
No footprints.
We didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, the words were still there, undisturbed. We didn't waste time. We packed and started the final leg back to the trailhead. The hike out was mostly downhill, long stretches of exposed trail. No signs of anyone else, just wind and cold. When we finally reached the car, I felt this deep, tired relief, like I'd been holding tension in my chest for days and could finally breathe again. On the drive back to town, no one talked much. We were all lost in our own thoughts. Later, back home, I looked up the phrase again. Found a few references. It wasn't a common motto. It showed up in a couple obscure places, mostly old exploration societies, weird early 20th century groups that believed in pushing past the known boundaries of the world. One article talked about a group in the 1920s that used the phrase before disappearing on an Arctic expedition. They were never found. Another mentioned the phrase was carved above the entrance to a sealed mine in Norway, blocked off after strange incidents in the 1960s. None of it made sense. I still have the photos, the message in the snow, the untouched clearing. Every now and then, I look at them and wonder what we walked into out there. Who left those words? Why they were written? Or how they appeared without a trace of how? I never got an answer. None of us did. But I haven't gone winter hiking since. And I don't think I ever will. We had been planning the trip for months. It was the kind of plan you make when you've been stuck in work and routine too long. When the walls of your house start to feel a little too close, the traffic a little too loud, the day-to-day stuff a little too meaningless. Me and two friends, we wanted to get away from all that, even if just for a weekend. So we decided on a remote camping trip. Nothing fancy, just us, some tents, and the woods. We picked a state forest we'd read about online, deep enough into the backcountry that there were no official campgrounds, no picnic tables or bathroom stops, just trailheads and endless trees. It was late fall, cool but not yet cold, and we figured we could squeeze in one last trip before winter really started to bite. We packed light, sleeping bags, tents, some simple food, a little portable stove, water filters, a small hatchet, and a bundle of firewood we'd bought at a local shop. We knew we'd be far from any stores or help, so we were careful to bring what we needed, but not so much that we'd be weighed down. The drive out was long. We left the city early, before the sun was up, and by midday we were winding along narrow two-lane roads, past small farms and forgotten towns, watching the trees get denser and taller. Eventually, the pavement ended, and we bounced down a rutted dirt road until we reached the trailhead, an empty gravel lot with nothing but a faded wooden sign marking the start of the trail. We shouldered our packs and set off. The hike was longer than we expected. The trail twisted and dipped through the forest, winding around hills and crossing over rocky streams. We passed through stands of pine and oak, the ground thick with fallen leaves, the air cool and sharp. Birds flitted overhead, and every now and then we'd catch sight of a deer slipping through the trees. By late afternoon, we'd hiked deep into the forest, far from any road or house. We found a small clearing near a creek, the ground flat and soft, with a good space for a fire. We set up our tents, gathered some extra firewood, and got the fire going just as the sun slipped below the trees. We cooked a simple meal, canned stew heated over the flames, some bread, a little whiskey passed between us to warm up. We sat close to the fire, watching the shadows stretch out, listening to the crackle of the flames and the soft sounds of the woods around us. There's something about being that far from anything that makes you feel both small and free. We stayed up late, feeding the fire, talking, staring up at the stars. By the time we crawled into our tents, the fire was still burning, though we'd let it die down to a low, steady glow. The coals pulsed gently in the dark, throwing faint red light over the clearing. I fell asleep quickly, wrapped in the warmth of my sleeping bag, the sounds of the forest soft in my ears. It must have been hours later when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. I lay there, blinking into the dark, feeling the cold air on my face, the stillness of the tent pressing in around me. I could hear the soft rustling of leaves outside, the faint gurgle of the creek nearby, but nothing else. Then I noticed the fire. The light was wrong. I rolled onto my side, unzipped the tent flap just a little, and peered out. The fire was almost out. Not just dying down naturally, but smothered, covered in dirt and ash, the faint glow buried under a layer of kicked-up soil. For a second, I was confused. We hadn't done that. We'd let the fire burn down, but we hadn't put it out. It should have still been glowing, maybe even flaring up a little if a breeze caught the coals. But now it looked like someone or something had come through and deliberately stamped it out. I felt a flicker of unease. I stayed still, listening hard, trying to pick up any sounds beyond the normal forest noise. That's when I heard the faint thud of hooves. My heart jumped. I slowly unzipped the tent a little more, peeking out into the clearing. There, just beyond the fire pit, were two large shapes. Wild boar. They were big. Even in the dim light, I could see their thick bodies, their bristly hides catching the faint starlight. They were snuffling around the camp, hooves scuffing the dirt, noses rooting at the ground. One of them had clearly kicked dirt over the fire, either by accident or maybe because it had been spooked by the smoke or heat. I froze. I knew enough to stay quiet. Wild boar aren't like deer or raccoons. They're aggressive, unpredictable, and strong. If they feel threatened, they'll charge. Their tusks can rip through flesh, and they have the mass to knock a person down without much effort. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, heart hammering in my chest. Minutes crawled by. The boar kept circling the camp, snorting and digging, occasionally kicking at the ground, their hooves scattering dirt and ash. Every time one of them got close to the tents, I felt a surge of fear, imagining what would happen if it decided to push its snout through the thin fabric to investigate the smell of food or people. But they didn't. They seemed more interested in the fire or what was left of it. It was almost like they were concerned about it, about the heat or the smoke or the flicker of light in the dark woods. They kept kicking dirt over it, stomping around it, pushing their snouts into the ash. Eventually, after what felt like hours, they drifted away. I listened carefully, straining to hear their heavy bodies moving through the underbrush, the faint snap of twigs underfoot, the soft huff of their breath. When I was sure they were gone, I let myself relax, just a little. But I didn't sleep again that night. The cold settled in harder without the fire, creeping into my sleeping bag, numbing my fingers and toes. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the sounds of the forest, waiting for dawn. When the first pale light touched the trees, I crawled out of the tent, stiff and shivering. My friends were awake too, their faces pale and tired. We didn't need to say anything. We all knew what had happened. We moved around the camp carefully, checking for any signs of damage. The fire pit was a mess, the coals buried under a thick layer of dirt and hoof prints. Our gear was untouched, but the ground was torn up, the soil kicked and churned by heavy hooves. We packed quickly. None of us wanted to stick around longer than we had to. The hike back was long, our packs heavier somehow, our steps slower. We kept glancing over our shoulders, listening for any sounds in the woods, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves setting our nerves on edge. By the time we reached the trailhead, we were exhausted, both physically and mentally. We loaded our packs into the car, climbed in, and sat there for a long moment, just breathing, feeling the warmth of the heater slowly seep into our frozen fingers. Driving away, I kept thinking about the way the boar had acted. They hadn't come looking for food, not really. They hadn't attacked our tents or scattered our gear. They'd been focused on the fire, on stamping it out, on kicking dirt over it until it was gone. Almost like they were worried about it, like they saw it as something dangerous or unnatural in their space. It was a strange thought that these wild animals, these big, heavy, rough creatures, had a kind of caution, a kind of awareness about the fire that went beyond simple curiosity. But maybe that's just how it is out there. The forest has its own rules, its own rhythms. We were just visitors passing through, bringing things, fire, noise, light that didn't belong. That trip stuck with me, not because of any big, dramatic moment, but because of the quiet, creeping tension of it. The slow realization that we were small and vulnerable, that the forest wasn't just a backdrop for our adventure, but a living, breathing world full of creatures that didn't care about us, that might even see us as a threat. We were lucky that night. The boar could have charged, could have wrecked our camp, could have hurt us badly. But they didn't. They did what they needed to do, They put out the fire, they made sure their space was safe, and they left. It was a reminder, one I won't forget. Out there, far from roads and houses and help, you're not in control. You're just another animal in the woods, hoping the others decide to leave you alone. And next time, I'll make sure the fire's out before I sleep. I started hiking early that morning, just after 5. The air was still and cold, the kind of cold that settles into your fingertips and doesn't let go even through gloves. It was late fall, that quiet pocket of time between when the leaves are gone and the snow hasn't quite started to stick. I was in the northern Cascades, way up in Washington state, deep into one of the lesser-used feeder trails that branched off from a fire access road. I had parked just off a rough dirt shoulder near a locked gate. No one else had signed in at the trail register in over a week. This wasn't a casual trip. I'd been planning the route for over a year. It was a long loop, covering more than 30 miles with significant elevation change and multiple ridge crossings. The route carved through narrow valleys and past several alpine lakes, a place hikers often avoided once the days started to shorten and the nights turned to frost. But I wanted that. I wanted the quiet, the kind of isolation you can only get when you go beyond what's comfortable. The first few miles were what I expected. Wet leaves, occasional patches of frost underfoot, and the slow gain of elevation that forces you to find a rhythm. I kept a steady pace. My goal was to reach an old fire lookout tower before dusk. It sat just off the loop, maybe a quarter-mile detour, but it offered shelter and an unbeatable view. I liked places like that, built by hand, barely touched in decades, open to anyone tough enough to reach them. The forest was dense as I climbed higher, pine needles forming soft carpets along the trail. Light filtered through in thin strips, turning the fog a dull silver. There was no sound beyond my boots and the occasional chirp of some bird too stubborn to migrate. I felt that comfort I always feel out there, removed, self-contained, a kind of independence you can't get anywhere else. Around midday, I stopped to eat. I sat on a wide rock slab beside the trail, my back against a dead tree, and watched the clouds shifting through the gaps in the treetops. I didn't see anyone. I hadn't all day. I kept moving, eventually clearing the tree line near 4,800 feet. The view opened up, revealing a wide basin below. It was beautiful in the way that remote, indifferent places are silent and unchanging. You could look at it for hours and still miss something. Wind tugged at my jacket as I navigated the last half mile to the lookout. The path was narrower here, cut into loose rock, barely wider than my shoulders. A misstep could have sent me tumbling 100 feet. But I made it. The fire lookout was just how I'd hoped. A small wood and metal structure anchored by thick bolts into the rock, its paint faded to almost nothing. The door was stuck from moisture, but I forced it open with a few hard shoulder checks. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and forgotten years. A rusted cot, a small stove, and a set of broken binoculars on a shelf were all that remained. I unpacked just enough to eat, then stepped back outside to look at the view. The basin stretched out wide below me, fading into the forest. That's when I noticed something strange. At the far end of the basin, maybe 2 miles out, something was gleaming. A pale glint on the ground, like sunlight hitting ice or metal. It was out of place. The forest should have blocked most reflections from reaching this far. But it was there, steady, not flickering. It didn't look like a lake or a frozen patch. It looked deliberate. I stared at it for a while, then told myself to forget it. I was tired. The sun was dipping fast, and I needed rest. I closed up the lookout, set out my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't. All night I kept waking up. Not from sounds, there were none, but from a feeling that something was off. I'd wake, listen, and hear only my own breath and the wind outside. But it didn't help. My thoughts kept circling back to that glint in the basin. I got up just before first light.
Ipakiet fast.
I was supposed to rejoin the main loop that day, but I changed my plan. I wanted to know what that reflection was. Felt wrong to ignore it, like walking away from a half-open door. I dropped elevation quickly, following an old game trail that wasn't marked on my map, but showed up faintly on satellite imagery I had stored offline. The descent was steep, the forest thick and damp. I moved carefully, marking my way with ribbon I had brought in case I had to backtrack. It took about 2 hours to reach the base of the basin. The forest floor was covered in patches of lichen and early frost. Trees here were old, really old, their trunks twisted, roots curling out like knotted hands. I scanned the area ahead, looking for the glint I'd seen the day before. And then I saw it. It wasn't ice. It was a pattern, scraped into the bare earth in a wide, cleared patch between the trees. A spiral, maybe 20 feet across, formed of shallow lines cut into the ground. The edges were clean. It hadn't been made by an animal. There were no footprints, no signs of digging, just that shape. I walked slowly toward it. It was beautiful in a strange way. Not art, but structure. It had precision, like someone or something had measured it. The lines all curved in toward the center, where a small flat stone sat, perfectly balanced. I crouched near the edge, studying it. The ground around it wasn't disturbed. No broken branches, no footprints, no sign of tools. Nothing that explained how it was made. Just this spiral in the middle of nowhere. I didn't step into it. I didn't touch it. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. I stood up and slowly backed away. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just foreign. Like it wasn't meant to be there. Or maybe I wasn't meant to see it. I made my way back up the slope, keeping my eyes down and my pace steady. The forest felt heavier, like something in the air had shifted. I reached the main trail again by mid-afternoon and didn't stop until I'd cleared another 3 miles. That night, I didn't set up my tent. I found a small hollow in a rock face and just lay down in my bag, under the stars. I didn't want walls around me. I needed to see the sky. I left the trail early the next morning, cutting my loop short and heading for the car. I didn't feel safe anymore. Not like I was in danger, but like I was being observed in a way I couldn't detect. I wanted out. When I got back to the parking area, my car was fine, untouched. The trail register still only had my name. The world was exactly how I'd left it. I went home, filed my report, uploaded my GPS logs. I didn't mention the spiral or the reflection. I told myself there was nothing to say, but something stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I tried to find anything that could explain what I'd seen. I searched geology databases for patterns like that. Nothing. I checked old land surveys. Nothing there either. It was like that patch of forest had been erased from memory. Eventually, I stopped looking. I told myself it didn't matter. It was just an odd formation, just a coincidence. But I still think about it, especially at night when the wind gets still and the house gets quiet. Because sometimes I dream of that spiral. Not the sight of it, but the feeling of standing there, alone, surrounded by something I couldn't see, but that I felt was looking back at me. I never hiked that area again. Some things, once seen, never really leave you. And I think sometimes that maybe I wasn't meant to find it. Maybe I wasn't meant to walk away. I started that hike in Pennsylvania with no real plan in mind. Just a day to myself, a free Saturday, weather that wasn't too hot, and a good stretch of trail I'd never explored before. I had heard about the rough sections of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. People called it Rocksylvania for a reason, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. I figured I'd do a decent out and back, probably 8 to 10 miles total. Nothing intense, just enough to get some air in my lungs and clear my head. I parked in a small gravel lot near a forest road and signed into the logbook at the trailhead. There were only 2 entries from the past 3 days. One was a solo hiker named Tiny Steps, and the other was someone who had just written LFTY. No date, no destination, just those 4 letters in big, crooked print. I thought it was odd but didn't dwell on it. The trail started out tame, just soft forest floor, mostly flat, a few roots here and there, but it didn't stay that way. Within the first mile and a half, it turned into sharp, angular rock gardens that forced you to watch every step. Some sections felt like climbing more than walking. I've been on a lot of trails, and this was one of the more unforgiving ones. I knew I'd be sore by the end of the day. By mile 3, I had broken a sweat and was pausing often to drink water. The trail narrowed through dense stands of mountain laurel and underbrush. It was just me out there, no other voices or footsteps, not even birdsong for a while, just the crunch of my boots on rock and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. I liked that silence usually, but that day something about it felt heavier. Not bad exactly, just thick, like the woods didn't want to give up whatever it was keeping. Around the 4-mile mark, I crested a ridge and came into a long boulder field. Sharp stones stretched out for at least a quarter mile. No trees, just rocks. Big ones, some the size of trucks, others like dinner plates stacked on edge. I stopped to catch my breath, bent over with my hands on my knees, and that's when I saw him. A man, maybe 50 or 60 yards ahead, walking toward me. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. He was naked, not partially, completely.
Nos shoes, nos socks, no shirt, nos shorts.
Just a faded green pack, a wide straw hat, and a pair of trekking poles. His skin was dark and leathery like old boot leather, the kind of tan you only get from living outside year-round. He walked casually, carefully placing his feet among the jagged stones like he'd done it 1,000 times. I stood up straight and stepped aside, expecting him to pass without a word, maybe nod and move on. But he stopped when he got close, closer than I expected anyone would in the middle of nowhere, and just smiled. He had a long, wiry gray beard, thin as wire, and deep lines carved into his cheeks. His eyes were bright and alert, not wild, not confused, just present, aware. I nodded and gave him a quick wave. He smiled wider. Then he started walking with me. No greeting, no question, no explanation for why he was naked. Just started walking beside me, talking in a slow, steady stream. I didn't catch everything he said at first. He talked like someone who'd been alone too long, like a faucet finally opened. He told stories about storms he'd hiked through, bears he'd stared down, strange places he'd found miles off any marked trail. He used trail names for everything: ridges, valleys, shelters. None of them appeared on any maps I'd seen. He'd say things like, "back when I crossed Devil's Elbow in '97, or right after the Rattler Nest at Low Creek Pass. And he said it with such confidence I didn't know whether to smile or question his sanity. He walked without pain, bare feet on sharp rock, calloused like hooves, never flinching. I looked at his soles a few times. They were thick, dirty, tough. I imagined what mine would look like if I tried the same, shredded, bleeding, useless. I asked, maybe 3 or 4 times, something like, "Don't your feet hurt?" Or "You always hike barefoot?" Just casual stuff. He never answered, just smiled or looked off into the trees, then changed the subject. He wasn't unfriendly, just detached from any need to explain himself. Like clothing, explanations were optional to him. After a while, I stopped asking. We walked together for maybe a mile and a half, just talking. Well, he talked, I listened. I didn't mind. There was something peaceful about it. Odd, sure, but peaceful. He had a strange rhythm to him, like he'd found his own frequency and just stayed there, no matter how the world moved around him. I started to relax, let my mind wander a bit, focused on the trail, the wind, the warmth of the sun on my back. It almost felt normal after a while. Then something changed. The air got still, dead still. No breeze, no bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush. Just that strange hush that presses on your ears like altitude. He stopped talking. I noticed it after a few seconds. His voice had just stopped. No pause, no goodbye to the last sentence. Just done. I looked over at him. He had stopped walking too, a few paces back, standing on the rocks, staring off into the woods on the left side of the trail. I followed his gaze. There was nothing there, just trees, brush, some dense understory. Nothing obvious, but he was frozen. I asked if he saw something, again just trying to be polite, to break that strange tension. Nothing. He stood still for maybe 10 seconds longer, then started walking again, away from me, off the trail, directly into the woods.
No explanación. No goodbye.
No glance back, just turned and stepped between two trees and disappeared. Silent, smooth, like water flowing around a rock. I stood there a moment, thought about calling after him, but I didn't. I waited a few minutes, looking into the woods where he'd gone. I didn't see anything. No movement, no sound, just that dead stillness. I got this feeling, not fear exactly, but something close. Like I just walked through the edge of something and didn't realize until I was out the other side. I turned around and started hiking back the way I came. I didn't look back until I was half a mile down the trail. Nothing was there, just trees, sunlight, rocks. When I got back to the parking lot, there were no other cars. No new names in the register, just mine. And that scribbled LFTY from days before. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his feet. The way he stepped so carefully, like he was part of the trail, not walking on it, but with it. I thought about how he vanished into the trees without breaking a branch or making a sound. The next day, I went online and tried to look him up. Naked Hiker Pennsylvania, Barefoot Trail Walker, Nudist Appalachian Trail. I found rumors, bits and pieces. Some guy named Lefty who'd been seen as far south as Virginia and as far north as Vermont. Same description. No shoes, no clothes, just a pack and a hat. Some said he'd been hiking the trail for decades. Others said he didn't exist. One post mentioned him in a 2004 forum thread, saying he talked nonstop and ignored every question. Another called him a ghost with skin, but the tone was always the same, not fear, just unease, like something didn't quite add up, but wasn't dangerous either. Years later, I hiked another section of the AT with a group of friends. We ran into a couple of long-distance hikers and I mentioned Lefty offhand. One of them, a guy with a long beard and sunburnt shoulders, smiled wide and said, "You met Lefty? Hell yeah, he's real." I asked if he knew who he was. He just shook his head. "Don't think anyone does," he said. "But if you see him again, just let him talk. Don't ask too many questions. He's not big on answers." I haven't seen him since. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, walking barefoot over rocks that tear other people's boots, ignoring the cold, the bugs, the rules of society like they were just optional. I still hike often, but I never forget that day. Not because I was scared, but because I saw someone who'd stepped completely outside the world most of us live in, and stayed there. If he's still out there, I hope he's okay. And if you're reading this, Lefty, stay weird. Stay exactly as you are.